is going to be a really quick video just reviewing a couple concepts for your post-assessment. So starting up at the top, X is used to represent our independent variable whenever we are writing equations, whenever we're graphing lines, whenever we're describing real world situations. We typically use X to describe the independent variable, and Y is used to describe the dependent variable. That means that the outcome of Y relies on X. So in our example, you charge a fee of $5 plus $8 per hour to babysit. This can be represented by the equation Y equals 8X plus 5. So in this scenario, if we had to decide what our X and what our Y were, we could say that X represents the amount of hours that we babysit, and Y represents the total amount that we charge. So we have like Y right here, X right here. X is the amount of hours that you babysit, Y is the total amount that you charge, because how much you charge depends on how many hours that you babysit for. So how much you charge, which is Y, depends on how many hours that you work or you babysit for, which is our X. So Y depends on X. Okay, the next section, so when you're measuring lengths, we use units of measurement like centimeters, inches, feet, meters. There's other ones like you can use miles or kilometers, depending on like how long something is or kind of the context of the situation. And depending on what size of object that you're measuring, that also kind of helps you determine what type of unit that you would need to use. So for example, you wouldn't want to use inches to measure the height of a large tree, but you could use feet or meters. So inches, like for measuring a really tall tree, it'd be like so many inches. So it'd be better off to measure it in feet or even meters, which is about 3 feet. Okay, the next section is for when we're measuring volume, which volume is like how much something holds, or like how much space it takes up. So for example, like if you have a cup filled with water, the volume of the cup is how much water it's holding. Or like if you have a book, if we were measuring the dimensions, volume would be like length times width times height. So because of that, it's a three-dimensional measurement. So we measure volume in cubic units, like cubic centimeters, cubic inches, cubic feet, or cubic meters, because it's a three-dimensional measurement. Okay, moving down to the dot plot example. So our example is you ask your friends how many states they have visited and organize the results in a dot plot. So we're just going to kind of break down what this dot plot means. So let's say I ask my friends how many states they've been to. Each of these dots on the dot plot represents one of my friends. So like this would be one friend that went to 3 states. And then each of these different like dots right here, those are 3 different friends that have been to 6 states. These are 2 different friends that have traveled to 7 states, and then 1 friend went to 8 states. So each of those dots represents a friend who has traveled to that many states, like the amount that they're hovering over, basically. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about is just kind of one definition to set up. So pure pupil expenditures, that means like how much you're spending per person or per student, depending on the context of the problem. So our example is the school spends $17.4 million on 2,175 students. How much is spent on each student? So we're trying to find the pure pupil expenditures. It's hard to say quickly. So like if I were to say, okay, I'm going to spend $10 on my 5 friends to get a snack. Then I think that problem's a little bit easier. Like we would take that $10, we would divide it by our 5 friends, and then find out that we spend $2 per friend. It's the same thing here. We still have to divide, but we just have to be careful because 17.4 million, we're gonna have to like actually expand that out. So instead of like 17.4, we'd have to write it with all the zeros. So 17.4 million would be a 17, and then the point 4 is like 400,000. So 400,000. So right, this is like thousands, 10,000s, 100,000, so 400,000, and then millions, 10 millions. So that's how much total we're spending on all the students. To find how much we're spending on one student, we would have to divide that by the quantity of students. So we'd have to divide that by 2,175, and that's how we would set up the problem. So definitely a calculator problem. We would take 17,400,000 and divide by 2,175. Oh, I did not realize that this was gonna give me a like perfect number. But when I divide that, it ends up being 8,000. If it wasn't like such a perfectly clean number like that, since it's money, we would just want to round to two decimal places.